Hello there, and welcome to Deep Sea Slumber. Tonight we descend, slowly, gently, past the last reach of sunlight, down into a place where darkness is not an absence but a permanent condition, and where one small creature carries its own light through the black. There is a world beneath the ocean surface that most of us will never see. Not because it is hidden exactly, but because it exists under pressures that would crush what we are made of, in a cold so complete it feels less like temperature and more like stillness made physical. The deep sea is not empty. It is full of forms of life that have spent millions of years learning to exist where almost nothing else can. And somewhere in that vast, pressured dark, there drifts a fish that seems, at first glance, like something imagined rather than evolved. A wide mouth, a body shaped more like a warning than an animal, and rising from its head, like a lantern held out by something patient and ancient, a single point of light. The anglerfish has a way of stopping people. Something about it catches in the mind and stays there. Perhaps it is the improbability that a living creature should grow its own glowing lure, that it should wait in absolute darkness for the rare and unlucky thing that swims too close to the glow. Perhaps it is the feeling, when you first see one, that the deep sea has been inventing life by different rules entirely. Rules we are only beginning to understand. Tonight we will spend time with this animal, not to be startled by it, though there is something startling here, but to understand it, to follow its light into the dark and discover that what first seems monstrous is, on closer looking, something closer to elegant, something shaped by a very particular world into a very precise answer. There is more to the anglerfish than its famous lure. There is a body engineered for scarcity. There is a way of finding another of its kind across distances that should make the task impossible. There is a life lived at the edge of what biology can do, and a kind of beauty in that once the eye adjusts to the dark. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. Now let your shoulders soften. Not a dramatic release, just a small letting go. The kind that happens when you remember you have been holding something without realizing it. Let your breath move at its own pace, slower than thought, slower than worry. And as we talk tonight, imagine that we are descending together, not falling, drifting. The way a slow current carries something without effort down through warmer water and then cooler water, and then into a place where the light from above becomes a faint suggestion and then disappears entirely. There is nothing alarming in this descent, only depth, only quiet. Only the strange and patient world that waits below. Let's begin. As the light appears, the rest of the body begins to make sense around it. That single glowing point, the thing that stops people, the thing that lodges in the mind, is not a separate organ. It is not a borrowed structure or an accidental growth. It is a modified spine. One of the first rays of the dorsal fin, which in most fish runs along the back in a neat row, has migrated forward over millions of years of slow change. It has moved to the top of the head. It has elongated into a slender stalk, and at its tip, it carries a small bulb of tissue that, in many species, produces light. The structure is called the illicium. The bulb at its tip is called the esca. Those are the formal names, though the names matter less than what the thing actually is. a fishing rod grown from a spine, held permanently above the mouth, dangling light in the dark. It takes a moment to absorb how strange that sentence is. Most animals that hunt must move toward their prey. They close distance. They pursue. They spend energy in the effort, and sometimes the effort fails, and the energy is gone. The anglerfish does something different. It produces an attraction. It offers something that looks like opportunity to whatever is swimming nearby, and it waits for the opportunity to be mistaken. The lure does the work. The fish that carries it barely moves at all. This is not laziness. It is a very precise answer to a very specific problem. The deep sea, below a few hundred meters, receives no meaningful sunlight. The water is cold and still and dark in a way that surface dwellers rarely experience. Not the dark of a room with the curtains drawn, but the dark of a place where light has never arrived. Not once. Not in any form. Not in the lifetime of any creature swimming through it. In that environment, movement is expensive. The water is dense. Every stroke of a fin costs calories, and calories are difficult to come by when prey is scarce and spread thin across enormous distances. Speed is a luxury. Pursuit is a gamble. And so some animals have evolved a different strategy entirely. Make something worth approaching, hold it still, and let the prey spend its own energy crossing the distance. The anglerfish is that strategy, made into a body. What makes the esca remarkable is not only what it does, but how it does it. In many deep-sea anglerfish species, the glow does not come from the fish itself. It comes from bacteria living inside the bulb, dense colonies of bioluminescent microorganisms that produce light through chemical reaction. The fish provides the bacteria with shelter and nutrients. The bacteria provide the fish with something it could not produce on its own: a sustained, reliable glow in an environment where any light at all is extraordinary. This is not a simple relationship. It is a partnership written into the biology of both organisms, shaped over long spans of time into something so integrated that the fish cannot easily glow without the bacteria, and the bacteria thrive best inside the esca. Neither organism planned this arrangement. It emerged because it worked, because the fish that carried light caught more prey, and the bacteria that found their way inside the bulb found a stable home. Over generations, what began as proximity became necessity. Bioluminescence itself is not rare in the deep sea. Many creatures produce it, some to attract, some to startle, some to signal to their own kind, some for reasons that are still not fully understood. Light is a language down there, in a place where color and shape and shadow are all absent. But the anglerfish's use of it has a particular elegance. The light is positioned directly above the mouth. Whatever the lure attracts, it attracts toward the one place on the body best prepared to receive it. There is something almost architectural about this. The esca itself varies considerably between species. Some are simple, a small fleshy bulb with a faint internal glow. Others are elaborate beyond expectation, branched, fringed, multi-lobed, decorated with filaments that drift and flutter in the slight movement of the water. Some species have escas that produce not just steady light, but intermittent pulses. Others can change the brightness or pattern of the glow, though the mechanisms behind this are still being studied. In a few species, the esca contains structures that may mimic the appearance of small invertebrates, a lure that looks like something edible rather than simply something bright. The deep sea has had a very long time to refine this tool. What the lure attracts depends on what is present in the water column. Small fish, crustaceans, squid, anything that perceives light as a signal worth investigating, which, in a lightless environment, may mean almost anything. That can see. The logic is sound. In a place where light is absent, light means something. It may mean a gap in the water column where photosynthesis is occurring. It may mean a congregation of small bioluminescent organisms which would attract larger prey. It may mean the esca of another anglerfish, which would mean a very different kind of encounter. Whatever the interpretation, the response to light in the deep is often approach. The anglerfish does not need to understand any of this. It only needs to hold its lure still and wait. Patience here is not a personality trait. It is a metabolic strategy. The anglerfish has a low resting metabolic rate. Its body is not burning through energy at the pace of a warm water fish in constant motion. It can remain essentially still for long periods, holding its lure at a particular depth and angle without the cost becoming prohibitive. When prey arrives and the lure has done its work, the fish strikes, fast, sudden, brief, and then returns to stillness. The burst of speed is real and can be startling in its contrast to the surrounding patience. But the stillness before it and after it is the larger part of what this animal does. Most of its life is the waiting. There is something in that worth sitting with. The idea that the most effective tool this animal carries is not a weapon, not a defense, not a means of escape, but a small light held out ahead of it like an offering. The lure does not harm. It only attracts. The harm comes later from the mouth behind it, which is another story. But the first gesture this animal makes toward the world is luminous. The illicium, the stalk that carries the esca, is movable. The anglerfish can angle it, forward, backward to one side, using a small set of muscles at its base. This matters because the position of the lure determines what is attracted and from which direction. A lure held forward draws prey toward the front of the mouth. A lure held to one side might attract something approaching from an angle. There is evidence that some species move the lure in subtle, irregular patterns. A slight trembling, a slow drift that makes it more convincing to whatever is watching from the dark. This is not instinct in any simple sense. It is behavior shaped by outcome, refined over time into something that works well enough in a hard enough place to have persisted for millions of years. The light itself is produced through a reaction between a molecule called luciferin and an enzyme called luciferase, which catalyzes the oxidation of the luciferin and releases energy as photons, as light. This chemistry is ancient. It appears in fireflies, in dinoflagellates, in deep-sea shrimp, in the organs of many unrelated creatures across very different branches of the tree of life. It evolved independently in different lineages, again and again. The same chemical solution to the same problem of producing light without heat, without fire, without a sun. That is worth pausing on. Life found the same answer from different starting points more than once. Not because it was inevitable. Nothing in evolution is inevitable. But because the chemistry was available and the advantage was real, and the world kept rewarding the organisms that found it. The anglerfish's version came through bacteria. That distinction matters. Rather than evolving its own light-producing cells, as some bioluminescent creatures have done, the deep-sea anglerfish acquired its glow through a relationship. It became, in a sense, a host for something that could do what it could not. And the bacteria, in turn, became something more than free-living microorganisms. They became part of an animal, housed in a specialized structure, illuminating a specialized purpose. The esca glows, and the dark receives the glow, and something in the dark begins, slowly or quickly, to move toward it. There is a quietness to that image that is hard to fully name. A small light in an enormous dark, something patient behind it, something curious approaching it. The transaction that follows is simple and ancient, and has been happening in one form or another in the deep ocean for a very long time. Before there were anglerfish, there was darkness, and the darkness persisted. And then, gradually, improbably, something evolved a way to make a small answer to it. Not to illuminate the dark, which would be impossible, but to use the dark, to make the darkness itself into the advantage. Because in a place where nothing glows, the one thing that does becomes the most interesting thing in the world. That is what the lure is. Not a light in spite of the dark, a light because of it. The stalk bends slightly in the slow movement of the water. The esca drifts, just barely, on the end of it. The glow is steady, or it pulses, or it holds very still, as if waiting for something to decide. And somewhere in the dark water, something is deciding. And once the lure has done its quiet work, another improbability comes into view. The thing approaching the light cannot yet see what is behind it. It sees only the glow, drifting, patient, beckoning in the way that light always beckons, in a place where light is rare. And what is behind it, waiting in the dark, is a mouth. Not a mouth in any ordinary sense. A mouth that is, in proportion to the rest of the body, almost the entire front of the animal. A mouth that opens wide enough to swallow prey larger than itself. A mouth that seems, at first glance, to belong to a creature with no interest in moderation. Until you understand that moderation is exactly what it is built for. The anglerfish's jaw is enormous relative to its body. In some species, the head accounts for more than half the animal's total length. The rest of the body, the stomach, the organs, the tail, trails behind the head like an afterthought, as if the body were designed to support the mouth rather than the other way around. It is, in a sense, exactly that. The mouth is the point. Everything else exists to carry it. That is a strange way to build a creature. Or it seems strange until you understand the arithmetic of the deep sea. Food is scarce down there. Not scarce the way a forest can be scarce in winter, where animals thin out and resources drop but still return with the season. Scarce in a more fundamental way. The deep sea receives almost no sunlight, which means it produces almost no plant life, which means the foundation of the food chain, the dense, sunlit productivity of shallow water, is simply absent. What food exists drifts down from above in a slow, sparse fall of organic material. Dead plankton, fish waste, the occasional larger body sinking through the water column. Or it swims through the dark in the form of prey animals that are themselves living on very little. Encounters with anything worth eating may be separated by hours, or days, or longer. There is no knowing. The deep sea does not follow a schedule. What this means for a hunter is something counterintuitive. It means that when prey appears, the size of that prey is almost irrelevant. What matters is that it appeared. And what matters even more is that nothing about the predator's design should prevent it from taking the opportunity. An anglerfish with a small mouth might pass up prey that is too large to swallow. An anglerfish with a large mouth does not have that problem. The architecture removes the constraint entirely. The teeth make the same argument differently. They curve inward, backward toward the throat, like a series of small hooks arranged to ensure that whatever enters the mouth does not easily leave it. This is not uncommon among predatory fish, but in the anglerfish, the recurved teeth are especially pronounced, especially numerous, and especially suited to the problem of holding prey that may be struggling. The teeth do not need to kill, they need to hold. The stomach can manage the rest, in time, at whatever pace the digestion allows. What makes this remarkable is not the shape of the teeth in isolation, but what that shape reveals about the animal's relationship with time. A predator that feeds often can afford to lose prey occasionally. If one fish slips away, another will come soon enough. But a predator that may wait days between opportunities cannot afford that same loss. Every encounter carries enormous weight. The teeth are not aggressive in the human sense of the word. They are conservative. They are an answer to scarcity, engineered into bone. And yet the bone itself is not quite what you might expect. Anglerfish skeletons are soft, reduced. The bones are thin, lightweight, and in many places not fully mineralized in the way that fish living in shallower water tend to be. The skull is large but not dense. The body is more flexible than it looks. This seems at first like another improbability. A creature with a massive head and enormous jaw that is not, underneath, especially robust. But consider what it costs to build bone, calcium, energy, resources. In a food-scarce environment, the body tends to invest only in what is necessary. And a fully mineralized, heavy skeleton is not necessary for an animal that does not need to be fast. The anglerfish does not chase prey. It does not need the rigid structure that speed and force require. It needs to be present. It needs to hold still or drift slowly and wait. For that kind of life, soft bones are not a weakness. They are an economy. The body is spending its limited energy on the things that matter: the lure, the mouth, the stomach, the waiting. Everything else is kept as light as possible, as quiet as possible, as inexpensive as possible. The stomach deserves its own moment. An anglerfish stomach can expand dramatically, well beyond what the resting animal appears to be capable of containing. The walls stretch. The tissue accommodates. There are accounts of anglerfish found with prey inside them that are comparable in size to the anglerfish itself, the stomach distended around the meal like a soft envelope that has been pushed to its limits. The animal that consumed something that large was not damaged by the attempt. It was designed for it. Imagine a structure built to hold almost nothing most of the time and almost anything when the moment comes. Not a fixed container, but a variable one. Patient in its emptiness, capacious in its fullness. The stomach does not know when it will next be needed. It simply remains ready. It has no other option. This is, in miniature, the entire philosophy of the anglerfish body. Everything is arranged around the premise that opportunity is rare and must be taken completely when it arrives. The mouth opens wide, the teeth hold, the stomach expands. Nothing is wasted, nothing is left behind. The meal, whatever it is, whatever size it happens to be, becomes fuel for the next long interval of waiting. There is something almost architectural about the way these features combine. The oversized head creates the leverage for a wide jaw. The jaw creates the opening. The recurved teeth create the retention. The expandable stomach creates the capacity. The soft, lightweight skeleton creates the possibility of housing all of this without the cost of dense structure. Each part implies the others. Remove one element and the system becomes less coherent. Together, they form something that is not random, but designed, not by intention, but by the slow pressure of a world that has very specific demands. That is what evolution does in environments like this. It does not produce elegance for its own sake. It produces fit. And fit in the deep sea means something particular. It means the ability to survive long intervals of scarcity and exploit short intervals of abundance without hesitation. The anglerfish does not hesitate. It cannot afford to. There is a fish called the black swallower that lives in the deep sea and is capable of consuming prey more than 10 times its own mass. It is not an anglerfish, but it is shaped by the same logic. The deep ocean produces this design independently, in different lineages, again and again. The enormous mouth, the flexible body, the willingness to swallow things that seem too large to swallow. The same scarcity, the same answer. That pattern is worth sitting with. It is not coincidence. It is convergence. Different animals arriving at similar solutions because the problem is the same and the available materials are the same, and the reward for solving it correctly is the same. Life in the deep sea keeps finding the same answer to the question of what to do when food is rare and opportunities are brief. Open wide. Hold on. Expand to fit. The anglerfish is one version of that answer. It is not the only one. But it is perhaps the most complete one. The animal in which every part of the body seems to have been recruited to serve the same central argument. And yet, there is something in the appearance of the anglerfish that resists easy categorization as efficient or elegant. The head too large. The jaw slightly agape, even at rest, as if the animal cannot quite close its mouth around its own design. The body trailing behind in a way that seems unresolved. The teeth visible even when nothing is happening. It looks, to many people, unfinished, like a sketch of a fish rather than a finished one. But that sense of incompleteness is a human judgment applied to a non-human problem. The anglerfish is not trying to look like a fish. It is not trying to look like anything. It is trying to survive in a place where the rules are different from the rules that govern the sunlit water near the surface, where streamlined bodies and quick reflexes and small, precise mouths make sense. Down here, in the cold and the pressure and the dark, those same features would be a liability. Speed costs energy. Precision requires frequent opportunities. Small mouths cannot swallow large prey. The anglerfish is not unfinished. It is finished for a different place. A place most creatures never reach and could not endure. A place where the body's job is not to be graceful, but to be ready, to wait in the dark with its mouth slightly open and its lure glowing softly overhead, and its stomach empty but expandable, patient in a way that has no equivalent in the sunlit world above. The light drifts. The water is very still. The body behind the light is almost invisible, dark above, pale below, shaped in a way that blurs its edges against the surrounding water. Something in the dark moves toward the glow. It cannot see the mouth yet. It cannot see the teeth or the jaw or the soft, waiting shape behind the lure. It sees only the light, which is small and steady and seems, in the darkness, like the most important thing in the world. And the anglerfish waits. It is very good at waiting. It has been built over a long time by a world that rewards patience and punishes waste, into a creature for whom waiting is not a strategy, but a nature. The mouth is open. The stomach is ready. The teeth curve quietly inward toward the dark. But the deep ocean does not reward the ordinary, and nowhere is that clearer than in how anglerfish find one another at all. The ocean is vast in a way that is difficult to hold in the mind, not the surface of it, which can be measured in miles and imagined from the shore. The interior of it, the three-dimensional dark below the light, is something else entirely. A cubic mile of deep water may contain only a handful of any given species. The distances between individuals of the same kind can be enormous. In that context, finding a mate is not a romantic problem. It is a logistical one and a serious one, and the anglerfish has solved it in a way that sounds, at first, like something invented for a story about impossibility. In several deep-sea anglerfish species, the male and female are so different from one another that for many years, scientists examining specimens did not realize they belonged to the same animal. The female is what most people picture when they hear the word anglerfish. The lure, the enormous head, the expandable stomach, the recurved teeth. She is the creature that has appeared in documentaries and children's books and nightmares. She is the one built for waiting in the dark with a light suspended above her open mouth. She is, by any measure, a substantial animal, at least by the standards of the deep sea, where most things are small. Some species reach lengths of several inches. A few reach longer. She is built for stillness and patience and the occasional catastrophic meal. The male is something else entirely. In the most extreme cases, the male anglerfish is less than an inch long. He has no lure. He has no expandable stomach. His teeth are not recurved for catching prey. He is small and dark, and when he hatches, he has one task before him and very little time to accomplish it. He must find a female. In the vast cold dark, with no map and no light of his own, he must locate one specific kind of creature in an ocean that contains almost nothing. What makes this even stranger is how he searches. The male anglerfish has unusually large eyes relative to his body, far larger than those of the female. He also has highly developed nostrils, sensitive to chemical signals dissolved in the water. He is, in other words, built almost entirely for finding. His entire body is oriented around detection. The eyes for any faint light, the nostrils for the chemical trace of a female. He drifts and searches, burning through energy he cannot replace, because there is nothing in him built for catching prey the way the female can catch it. He is not a hunter in that sense. He is a seeker, and when he finds her, when the faint glow of her lure reaches his enormous eyes, or her chemical signature reaches his nostrils, he approaches and bites into her side. In some species, this is where the story would end. He attaches temporarily. He contributes what he came to contribute. They separate. This is unusual enough on its own. But in the species that have captured the most attention, the ceratioid anglerfish, the deep-sea group that includes the most dramatic examples of this behavior, the story does not end there. He does not let go. The tissues begin to fuse. His mouth connects to her skin and then through it into her circulatory system. His blood vessels merge with hers. Over time, his eyes degenerate. His internal organs, no longer needed in their original form, reduce and simplify. He becomes, in a biological sense, part of her, a small, permanent attachment on her body, supplied by her blood, sustained by her metabolism, contributing sperm when her body signals that reproduction is possible. This is called sexual parasitism, though that word carries implications that may not quite fit. He is not harming her in the way a parasite typically harms a host. He is not taking more than she can afford. The arrangement appears to be genuinely mutual. She provides the nutrients and the oxygen. He provides the one thing she cannot provide for herself in the vast and lonely dark: reliable access to reproduction without the need to find another male. For a long time, the mechanism of this fusion was not well understood. How does one animal's immune system accept another's tissue without rejection? In most organisms, the immune system is specifically designed to identify and destroy foreign cells. It is one of the body's most fundamental defenses. Yet, in these anglerfish, the fusion holds. The tissues integrate. The male survives as part of the female, sometimes for years. Recent research has offered a partial answer. The ceratioid anglerfish appear to have a significantly reduced adaptive immune system compared to most vertebrates. The molecular machinery that would normally identify foreign tissue and mount a rejection response is, in these species, simplified or suppressed in ways that are still being studied. The result is an immune system that is, in certain respects, less precise, and that imprecision is what allows the fusion to work. It is a loss that became a solution. The immune system gave something up, and what it gave up made room for something unprecedented in the vertebrate world. What this means, taken slowly, is remarkable. Two animals become, in a meaningful physiological sense, one organism. They share blood, they share oxygen, they share the slow metabolic rhythm of life in the cold dark. The male's body, which began as a separate creature with separate needs and a separate trajectory through the water, becomes continuous with hers. The boundary between individuals dissolves in a way that has no real equivalent anywhere else among backboned animals. Imagine trying to find a word for that in any human language. There isn't one. The degree of size difference between male and female, what biologists call sexual dimorphism, is among the most extreme documented in any vertebrate species. The female may outweigh the male by a factor of hundreds of thousands. In some comparisons, the ratio approaches 1,000,000 to 1. If this seems impossible, consider that it is the result of two bodies shaped by entirely different pressures. The female's body is shaped by the problem of surviving and feeding in the deep sea. The male's body is shaped by one problem only: finding her. Evolution does not produce excess. Every feature costs something. The male's large eyes cost energy to develop and maintain. His sensitive chemical receptors cost energy. His small size means he carries less reserve fuel, which makes his search more urgent, more time-limited. He is built lean because leanness is what allows him to survive long enough to succeed. There is nothing in him that is not directed toward that single purpose. And once he has succeeded, once the fusion is complete and the search is over, most of what he was is no longer necessary. The eyes that found her in the dark are no longer needed. The searching is done. What remains is the function he came to fulfill sustained by the body he has now joined. There is something in this that is difficult to categorize as either loss or completion. He does not continue as an individual in the way most animals do. But the drive that organized his entire brief, independent life, the urgent, costly, improbable search across an enormous dark, reaches its conclusion. The search ends. The body stills. The deep water holds them both. Several females have been recovered from research vessels or deep-sea camera footage with multiple males attached. 2, occasionally 3, each fused to a different point on her body, each connected to her circulatory system, each waiting. This means she carries within her, or rather, as part of her, more than one genetic partner. The redundancy is not accidental. In a place where finding even one male is a near miracle, carrying the possibility of reproduction always, without the need for another search, without the risk of separation, is an advantage that outweighs almost any cost. The deep ocean is not sentimental about strategy. It rewards what works. Not all anglerfish species exhibit this permanent fusion. In others, the male remains free-living, attaching temporarily during reproduction and then separating. The spectrum runs from full independence to complete biological merger, and where a given species falls on that spectrum seems to track with how deep and how isolated their habitat is. The deeper and darker the environment, the more genuinely sparse the population, the more extreme the fusion tends to be. That correlation carries its own quiet logic. Where finding a mate once is already improbable, losing one after finding them would be a cost too large to absorb. The body finds a way to hold on, and holding on over many generations becomes the shape of the species. What the male anglerfish represents, in the slow language of evolutionary time, is a complete reorganization of what an individual is. Most animals maintain their boundaries throughout their lives. The self is a closed system, defended against intrusion. The anglerfish male begins that way, a separate creature, moving through dark water on his own terms, searching with everything he has. And then the boundary opens, and what was two becomes, in the most literal biological sense, one. It is not a story with a clear moral. It does not map neatly onto any human category of union or sacrifice or loss. It is something the deep ocean arrived at on its own terms, in its own time, under pressures that have nothing to do with the world above the surface. The water is cold and very still. Somewhere in the dark, a light drifts slowly, and attached to the body that carries that light, barely visible against her skin, is a small and quiet shape that was once a separate creature moving urgently through the vast dark in search of exactly this. The search is over. The two of them drift together, unhurried in the deep. And when a body is this specialized, the question gently shifts from what it is to how it lives. The deep ocean begins around 200 meters below the surface, where the last usable light disappears. Below that threshold, pressure increases by roughly 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of descent. At 600 meters, where many anglerfish spent their lives, the water presses in from every direction with a force that would collapse an unprotected human lung in seconds. At 1,000 meters, the pressure is nearly 100 times what we experience at the surface. The anglerfish lives there, not despite this, because of it. Pressure at these depths is not an obstacle to be overcome. It is a condition to be matched. and the anglerfish body has been shaped over an enormous span of time to match it precisely. The bones of a deep-sea anglerfish are soft, not brittle, not fragile in the way we might assume bones to be when they lose their density. Soft in the way that cartilage is soft, flexible, compressible, able to absorb rather than resist the immense weight of water above. Many deep-sea fish share this quality to some degree, but in the anglerfish it is particularly pronounced. The skeleton does not hold the body rigidly in space. It yields, it accommodates. This matters because rigid structures under extreme pressure require significant energy to maintain. A body built from dense mineralized bone at depth is a body spending resources on structural resistance that might otherwise go towards survival. The anglerfish has, over time, traded rigidity for compliance. The skeleton becomes less a frame and more a gentle suggestion of shape, enough to hold the organs in place, enough to anchor the jaw, enough to exist without demanding much in return. What this tells us is that even the most basic material of the body is negotiable. Bone is not always bone. In the right environment, under the right pressures, literal and evolutionary, it becomes something quieter, something that bends rather than holds firm. The anglerfish skeleton is not a weakness. It is an answer. The muscles of a deep-sea anglerfish are sparse by the standards of the upper ocean. Fish that live near the surface and depend on speed, mackerel, tuna, certain sharks, carry dense, oxygen-rich red muscle tissue that supports sustained, powerful movement. The anglerfish carries very little of this. Its muscle density is low. Its body, relative to its size, is light in a particular way. Not weightless, but not heavy with the machinery of speed either. That is why they drift. Drifting is not passivity in the deep sea. It is a precise strategy. An anglerfish that held its position through constant muscular effort would burn energy it cannot reliably replace. Food at these depths arrives rarely and unpredictably. The math of survival requires that expenditure stay as low as possible between meals. So the anglerfish achieves something close to neutral buoyancy, a state in which it neither sinks nor rises, but simply remains suspended in the water column with minimal effort, like a thought that stays in the mind without being held there. Swim bladders, which many fish use to regulate buoyancy, are often reduced or absent in deep-sea anglerfish. Instead, the body compensates through tissue composition, reduced bone density, low muscle mass, and in some species, a small accumulation of lighter fluids within the body cavity, all working together to make the animal almost weightless in its own medium. The physics are elegant. The result is a creature that can remain motionless in three-dimensional space, lure glowing softly before it for extended periods without meaningful energy cost. Motion is expensive. Stillness is free. The anglerfish has built its life around that arithmetic. The skin of most deep-sea anglerfish is dark, in many species nearly black. This seems obvious. What use is camouflage in a place with no light? But bioluminescence changes the calculation. Other creatures in the deep sea do produce light. Some hunt using it. Some communicate with it. And a pale or reflective surface, catching a passing glow at the wrong moment, could mean the difference between being seen and remaining invisible. The dark skin absorbs rather than reflects. It makes the body disappear against the surrounding water, which at depth is not truly black so much as an absence. a medium that swallows rather than illuminates. The anglerfish lure draws things toward it. The rest of the body stays hidden. This is not incidental. The light is meant to attract attention. The body is meant to attract none. There is something quietly architectural about this. The animal is designed around a single point of visibility, surrounded by deliberate concealment. Everything that the lure draws in arrives at a body it cannot see until the moment of capture. The darkness of the skin is not a default. It is a design choice made by millions of years of selective pressure. The fish, whose skin was slightly too pale, occasionally caught the wrong kind of attention, and that slight disadvantage compounded over generations into the deep, light-absorbing dark of the anglerfish we find today. The lateral line is a sensory system found in nearly all fish, running along the sides of the body as a series of tiny pores and hair-like cells that detect vibration and pressure changes in the surrounding water. In the anglerfish, this system is refined for a particular kind of listening. At depth, sound travels differently than near the surface. The water is colder and denser, and pressure waves move through it in ways that a surface-adapted sensory system might not register accurately. The deep-sea anglerfish's lateral line is tuned to low-frequency disturbances, the kind produced by a small animal moving nearby, the faint displacement of water that signals something living passing through the dark. The anglerfish does not need to see its prey. It needs only to feel the water shift around it. This means the anglerfish is never entirely in the dark in the way we might imagine. It inhabits a sensory world quite different from our own, one built from pressure and vibration rather than light and color. When something swims toward the lure, the anglerfish knows before it sees. The lateral line registers the approach as a change in the texture of the water, a ripple of information arriving at the body from all directions simultaneously. Imagine standing in a completely dark room, but able to feel the air move as someone walks toward you. Not just with your skin, but with your entire body at once. That is something like what the lateral line provides. It is not vision. It is closer to a form of listening with the whole self. The temperature at these depths hovers near freezing, not frozen. Seawater, with its salt content, remains liquid below 0 Celsius, but cold in a way that would, for most warm-blooded animals, mean death within minutes. The anglerfish is cold-blooded, its internal temperature matching the water around it. This is not a disadvantage. It is a precise fit. Metabolic rate in cold-blooded animals slows with temperature. A cold anglerfish is a slow-burning anglerfish, one whose organs demand less fuel, whose heart beats less frequently, whose entire physiology has downshifted into something close to the minimum necessary to remain alive and functional. This is not dormancy. The animal is alert, but it is alert at a pace calibrated to its environment, not to ours. Cold water also holds more dissolved oxygen than warm water. This is why the deep ocean, despite its distance from the surface and its lack of photosynthesis, is not oxygen depleted in the way some shallower zones can be. The anglerfish breathes in a medium that, while cold and pressurized and lightless, offers adequate oxygen for a body that has learned not to ask for more than it needs. The cold is not a hardship the anglerfish endures. It is a resource the anglerfish uses. All of this, the soft bones, the sparse muscle, the dark skin, the refined lateral line, the slow cold metabolism, adds up to something that resists simple description. The anglerfish is not a creature that has survived the deep ocean. That framing suggests struggle, endurance, an animal pressing against conditions that work against it. The truth is quieter and more interesting. The anglerfish is a creature that has become the deep ocean. The environment and the body have been in conversation for so long, across so many generations, that separating them becomes difficult. The pressure shaped the bones. The darkness shaped the skin. The cold shaped the metabolism. The scarcity shaped the appetite and the patience and the stillness. What we call oddness when we look at an anglerfish is really specificity. It is the specificity of a life shaped entirely by one place, without compromise or approximation. The anglerfish does not look like a fish that could survive elsewhere and happens to live in the deep. It looks like a fish that could only ever have come from exactly where it lives. That is a different kind of animal than we usually encounter. Most creatures we know exist along a gradient. They have a preferred habitat, but they can tolerate variation. The anglerfish, in its most specialized deep-sea forms, has no gradient. It is matched to its environment so precisely that the match itself becomes the story. Somewhere below 600 meters, in water near freezing and darker than any darkness we experience on land, a small light drifts. The body behind it is nearly invisible. Dark skin against dark water, soft bones holding a quiet shape, muscles resting, lateral line awake and listening. The pressure around it is immense and entirely unremarkable to the animal that has always lived inside it. The cold is not felt as cold. It simply is. The stillness is not patience in the way we might experience patience, as waiting for something we want. It is a state without wanting, without restlessness, a body calibrated so precisely to its world that nothing in that world feels like a condition to be endured. The light drifts, the water holds it, the darkness holds them both. And in this stillness, the anglerfish is not waiting for its life to begin. It is already living it fully in the only way it has ever known. A creature that moves so little can still be deeply active in another way, by shaping the small circle of life around it. The lure drifts. The body behind it is still. And in that stillness, something is happening, not despite the quiet, but because of it. Ambush predation is not a simple strategy. It is not merely waiting. It is the construction of a situation held together over time in which another animal makes a choice it would not have made if the anglerfish had not been there. The anglerfish does not chase. It arranges. And the difference between those two approaches, in the deep ocean's slow economy, is the difference between surviving and spending more energy than the deep will ever give back. Most predators in the shallow ocean rely on pursuit. They are faster than their prey, or nearly so, and they close the distance through effort. That approach requires a body built for speed, strong muscles, high metabolic rates, frequent feeding to fuel the engine that keeps the chase possible. The deep sea offers none of those conditions easily. Food is scarce. Cold water slows metabolism, but also slows the rate at which energy can be recovered from a meal. Movement is expensive in a way that is difficult to overstate. A calorie burned swimming is a calorie that may not be replaceable for days or longer. In this environment, a predator that relies on speed is a predator constantly in debt. The anglerfish evolved a different accounting. Stillness here is savings. Every moment of not moving, is a moment of not spending. The energy held inside the body during a long period of motionless waiting is energy that remains available for the one moment when it will matter. That moment is the strike. And the strike, when it comes, is extraordinarily fast. A rapid expansion of the enormous jaw and a rush of water that pulls prey inward almost before any decision to flee can be formed. The chase is compressed into a fraction of a second. Everything else is patience. What makes this approach work is the lure. Without it, stillness would simply be invisibility, an animal hiding in the dark, waiting for prey to wander close enough by accident. The lure transforms the strategy. It provides something for another animal to move toward. It supplies the motion that the anglerfish itself withholds. The prey does the traveling. The anglerfish simply holds the destination. The light itself moves, and that movement is not random. Anglerfish have fine muscular control over the illicium, the modified spine that carries the lure, and they can sweep it in slow arcs, let it drift and settle, pulse it gently, or hold it nearly still. Different movements may suggest different prey. A small fish swimming, a crustacean drifting, a point of bioluminescence that has no obvious source and invites investigation. What the lure actually mimics, if it mimics anything in particular, varies by species and is not fully understood. But the principle holds. Something small and luminous moving in a predictable pattern in the dark is a signal that draws attention. It draws animals toward it. And drawing animals toward the anglerfish is the entire project. There is something worth pausing on here. The anglerfish does not simply glow. It performs. The movement of the lure is a kind of behavior, a repeated, controlled action directed outward into the water toward other animals. It is one of the few things the anglerfish does that is unmistakably active, unmistakably purposeful. The rest of the body may be nearly motionless. The lure is working. The contrast between the stillness of the whole and the subtle activity of that one small light is part of what makes the anglerfish difficult to hold in the mind as a single image. It is simultaneously one of the most patient animals in the ocean and one of the most deliberate. The animals drawn toward the lure are, in most cases, smaller fishes, crustaceans, and other invertebrates that share the deep or pass through it during their nightly migrations. Many deep-sea creatures travel vertically, rising toward shallower water in darkness to feed, then sinking again before daylight reaches them. This movement brings prey through the anglerfish's range at roughly predictable intervals. The anglerfish does not follow these migrations. It holds a position and lets the migrations come to it. The deep ocean, in this sense, is not entirely still. It has currents, gradients, rhythms of vertical movement. The anglerfish is anchored within those rhythms, positioned to benefit from them without participating in them. Positioning matters more than movement when you are an ambush predator. An anglerfish holding station near a slight thermal gradient or near a region where drifting organic matter concentrates, or within a depth band that migrating prey regularly pass through, is an anglerfish that has solved a significant part of the hunting problem before anything comes within range of the lure. How anglerfish select these positions is not well documented. The deep sea is difficult to observe at the resolution required to understand these choices in real time. But the body offers clues. The lateral line, sensitive to pressure changes and vibrations in the surrounding water, gives the anglerfish a continuous sense of what is moving nearby, at what distance, and in what direction. The anglerfish is not blind to its environment, even in complete darkness. It is listening to the water itself. That listening is quiet and continuous. Long periods may pass with nothing registering. No vibration, no shadow crossing the lure's faint glow, no pressure wave that signals an approaching body. The anglerfish remains. It does not shift its position out of restlessness, because restlessness, in biological terms, requires a nervous system running at a cost the deep sea does not easily subsidize. The patience of the anglerfish is not a mental state. It is a metabolic one. The body is simply not burning fast enough to feel urgency. The weight is sustainable in a way that, for an animal with a higher metabolic rate, it would not be. And then something changes. A signal arrives, through the lateral line perhaps, or through whatever visual sensitivity the anglerfish retains in its small eyes. Something is moving toward the lure. Something has noticed the light and is investigating. What happens next is one of the fastest events in the deep ocean. The jaw opens. The expansion is almost instantaneous, creating a drop in pressure inside the mouth that draws water, and whatever the water carries, inward. The teeth, curved backward, make exit nearly impossible for anything that enters. The stomach, soft and expandable, accommodates what arrives. The whole sequence, from stillness to capture, takes milliseconds. Then the anglerfish is still again. The lure continues to drift. The water around it settles. If the strike was successful, a meal has been acquired at a cost that represents only a tiny fraction of the energy that meal will eventually provide. The accounting balances. Sometimes it balances enormously in the anglerfish's favor. What is striking about this is not the speed of the strike. Many predators strike quickly. What is striking is the ratio of waiting to acting, the ratio of stillness to motion, the ratio of patience accumulated to energy spent in the decisive moment. Most predators we think of when we think of hunting are defined by their movement, the chase, the dive, the pursuit. The anglerfish is defined by its restraint. The hunting is almost entirely in the not moving. The strike is almost an afterthought, so refined that it barely disrupts the stillness that surrounds it. This is ambush predation carried to something close to its logical extreme. Other ambush predators, the stonefish resting on a reef, the alligator, snapping turtle holding its mouth open in a river, use similar principles in shallower, warmer, food-richer environments. But in those environments, the consequences of a failed hunt are less severe. Food can be found again within hours. The deep-sea anglerfish exists in an environment where failed hunts may not be recoverable for much longer than that. The precision of the strategy and the depth of the body's commitment to it reflects the severity of the place it evolved to serve. There is a kind of mastery here that is easy to overlook because it looks like nothing. A creature sitting in the dark, barely moving, waiting for something to come close enough to catch. It does not look like expertise. But expertise in the deep ocean does not look the way it looks in shallower water. Speed is not available. Strength is not advantageous beyond a certain point. What is available and what the anglerfish has refined over millions of years is precision of timing and economy of means. The lure moves just enough. The body holds its position just long enough. The strike happens at exactly the right moment. Nothing extra is spent. Nothing is wasted. The deep ocean does not reward excess, it rewards fit. And the anglerfish's hunting strategy is a fit so complete that it becomes difficult to imagine improving on it, given the constraints. More movement would cost more energy. A faster metabolism would require more frequent meals in an environment where meals are rare. A larger, more powerful body would need more food to sustain itself, which would require more successful hunts, which would require moving more, which would cost more energy. The anglerfish holds a position in that logic that is almost elegant in its internal consistency. It has found a balance point and, across deep time, settled there. And so the lure continues to drift. The body, behind it, rests in the cold and the dark, holding its place in the water column, lateral line listening, jaw ready, metabolism slow and steady and sufficient. There is no impatience in this picture, and no urgency. The deep ocean does not offer urgency, and the anglerfish has long since stopped expecting it. Whatever comes, will come. The light will be there when it does. The waiting is not empty. It is full of readiness, quiet, continuous, and almost entirely invisible to anything that does not know to look for it. And those rare meetings are only part of a larger web, because no deep-sea animal lives entirely alone. The deep ocean is not empty. It is full of animals that almost never see one another. That distinction is important. Emptiness and isolation are not the same thing. And the anglerfish lives in a world that is the second kind, populated but sparsely, with vast distances between individuals and no reliable way to cross them quickly. Finding food is one problem the anglerfish has solved with patience and light. Finding another anglerfish, a member of the same species at the same moment in its reproductive cycle, close enough to matter, is a different problem entirely. And the deep sea does not make it easier. Consider the scale first. A single cubic kilometer of deep ocean might contain only a handful of anglerfish of any given species. The water column extends for hundreds of meters in every direction. There is no landmark, no edge, no feature of the terrain that would cause two animals to converge on the same location. There is no seasonal gathering place, no migration corridor that funnels individuals together the way that rivers do for salmon, or shallow reefs do for spawning fish. There is only the dark, the cold, and the pressure, stretching in every direction with the same featureless consistency. The problem of finding a mate in this environment is not a small one. It may be the most difficult logistical challenge an anglerfish faces across its entire life. This is why the answer evolution arrived at does not involve sight. In the deep sea, sight is a tool of limited range. Even where bioluminescence provides a small point of light, that light does not travel far enough to be useful across the distances that would need to be bridged. What does travel? Quietly, persistently, and across remarkable distances in moving water is chemistry. The female anglerfish releases chemical signals into the surrounding water, pheromones that carry specific information about species identity and reproductive readiness. These molecules drift outward from her body with the slow currents, spreading in a plume that may extend far beyond anything visible. A male, somewhere in that darkness, detects the signal with sensory organs tuned to find it. That tuning is precise. Male anglerfish have notably large olfactory organs relative to their small bodies, sensory structures disproportionately developed compared to almost everything else about them. Their eyes, too, are arranged to detect movement and contrast in dim conditions, oriented in ways that suggest they are built for searching rather than waiting. The male's entire anatomy reflects a creature whose primary purpose is pursuit. He is, in a sense, a mobile sensory array whose central task is the detection and approach of a single specific chemical signature in an enormous volume of water. Everything about him is organized around that task. When the signal arrives, faint at first and then gradually stronger as he moves toward its source, the male follows it with a persistence that reflects how much depends on the outcome. What makes this remarkable is not the mechanism itself. Many animals use chemical signals to locate mates, but the scale at which it must operate and the specificity it must achieve. In a shallow, warm, species-rich environment, a pheromone plume might be useful over meters or tens of meters. In the deep ocean, where currents are slow and diffuse, and the signal must survive long enough to cross the distances involved, the chemistry must be both stable and distinctive. It must carry information that distinguishes one species from another. Because in the deep sea, meeting the wrong species is not just a missed opportunity. It is a costly expenditure of the energy that the male anglerfish can barely afford to spend. He has no lure. He cannot wait for food to come to him the way the female can. He must move, and movement costs energy, and energy in the deep sea is always limited. He follows the signal because there is no other option, and because his body was built to do exactly this one thing well. The journey itself is largely invisible to us. We have almost no direct observation of male anglerfish in open water navigating toward a female. What we know comes from anatomy, from the study of captured individuals, from the logic of the environment, and from inference. The male swims. He adjusts direction as the chemical gradient shifts. He may travel for hours or longer, covering distances we can only estimate. The deep ocean gives us almost no windows into this process. It happens in the dark, in water we cannot easily reach, between animals small enough to be overlooked even when we are looking. But the evidence of the journey is written into the male's body so clearly that the story is not in doubt, even when the details remain hidden. And then, at some point, the distance closes. For species where temporary mating occurs, where the male finds the female, reproduction takes place and the two animals separate. That moment of encounter is the culmination of a search that may have lasted a significant portion of the male's adult life. He is small, she is large. The size difference between them can be extraordinary, as much as 60 times her mass in some species, though this varies considerably. He approaches in the dark, guided by chemistry, perhaps also by the faint glow of her lure in the far distance. The encounter is brief relative to the journey that preceded it. And then it is over, and both animals return to their separate existences in the dark water. For species where permanent fusion occurs, the encounter ends differently. The male bites and holds, and the tissues begin to merge. But that story has already been told here, and what matters in this moment is the part that precedes it. The search, the signal, the long passage through dark water towards something the male has never seen but was built to find. The fusion, strange as it is almost the simpler part. It is the finding that is the genuine improbability. What the anglerfish shows us in this is something quiet and worth sitting with. Connection in the deep ocean is not impossible. It is just very difficult and life has responded to that difficulty not by abandoning connection, but by refining the means of achieving it. The pheromone plume is not a workaround or a compromise. It is an elegant solution to a genuine physical problem. How do you find another living thing when you cannot see, when you cannot hear in the way surface animals do, when the water around you extends for hundreds of kilometers in every direction and contains almost nothing familiar? You release chemistry into the current. You build a body that can detect it across distance. You follow the gradient with patience that matches the scale of the environment. There is something in this that feels almost like intention, though it is nothing of the sort. Evolution has no intentions. It has only outcomes. What worked, repeated across generations until it became reliable. The pheromone system worked. The sensitive olfactory organs worked. The male's mobile, searching body worked. They worked well enough that they persist today, in species that have been refined by the deep ocean across timescales that make human history seem like a brief interruption. The connection between two anglerfish, when it happens, is the product of an almost incomprehensible accumulation of solved problems. Timing adds another layer to this. Anglerfish, like many deep-sea animals, are thought to have some synchronization in their reproductive cycles, though the mechanisms are not fully understood. In the deep ocean, there is no sunlight to mark seasons. Temperature changes are minimal and slow. The cues that surface animals use to coordinate reproduction, day length, water temperature, food availability, are either absent or so muted as to be nearly unreadable. Yet some coordination must exist, because a female releasing pheromones when no males are in a reproductively active state would be wasting the signal, and the deep ocean does not easily tolerate waste. The internal clocks that govern this timing are not well mapped. They may respond to subtle pressure changes, to the faint fluctuations in deep current patterns, to cues we have not yet identified. The synchronization exists. Its source is still partly a mystery. That mystery is worth naming rather than glossing over. The deep ocean is genuinely, persistently unknown in ways that the surface ocean is not. We have better maps of the surface of the moon than of the deep seafloor. We have observed far more individual surface fish than individual deep-sea anglerfish. What we know about anglerfish reproduction is substantial, but it is built on a foundation that has many gaps, and those gaps are not failures of science so much as they are reflections of how genuinely difficult this environment is to study. The animals live in the cold and the dark, at depths that require specialized equipment to reach and only brief windows of observation once we are there. They do not survive well at the surface. Their behavior in captivity, when captivity is even possible, may not reflect their behavior in the deep. We are working, in many ways, from inference and anatomy and the occasional specimen preserved in a jar. And yet, what we do know is enough to make the picture coherent. A female drifts, lure glowing, waiting for prey and releasing chemistry into the water around her. Somewhere in the dark, a male detects that chemistry and begins to move. The distance between them is enormous. The odds of success are low. The energy available for the search is limited. And yet the search happens, and sometimes it succeeds, and when it does, the species continues. That is the whole of it, stripped to its simplest form. But the simplest form does not capture what it actually means. That in one of the most inhospitable environments on the planet, in water so cold and dark and pressurized that it seems designed to discourage life, two animals find one another. Not always, not easily, but often enough that the species persists and has persisted across a span of time that dwarfs almost anything we can comfortably imagine. The deep ocean is full of this kind of quiet persistence. Not triumph, not drama, just the slow continuation of life in a place that asks a great deal and gives very little back, and the remarkable fact that life keeps finding ways to answer the asking. The anglerfish answers with a lure and a patient body and a chemistry that travels through dark water until something receives it. It is not a romantic picture in any conventional sense, but there is something in it that feels, in its own strange and ancient way, like enough. The longer we watch this life, the less strange it seems, and the more it begins to feel like a different answer to the same ancient questions. The deep ocean is not empty. That is the first thing to understand about it, and perhaps the hardest, because everything about its surface impression suggests otherwise. No light, extreme cold, crushing pressure, a silence so complete that it seems to preclude the possibility of anything happening at all. And yet, things happen there constantly. They happen slowly, and they happen quietly, and they happen according to a logic that is not the logic of the surface world. But they happen. The deep sea is full of life. It is just a different kind of full. The anglerfish is one creature in that fullness. To understand where it sits, it helps to think about the deep ocean not as a single place, but as a series of places stacked vertically in the water column, each with its own conditions, its own pressures, its own community of organisms shaped by the particular balance of light and cold and distance from the surface that defines that zone. The uppermost layer of the ocean receives sunlight. Photosynthesis happens there. Plants grow, and small animals eat the plants, and larger animals eat those. And the whole system runs on solar energy in a way that is familiar and legible. But below that lit layer, things change. The light fades, and then it is gone entirely. And the organisms living in those deeper zones must make do with whatever energy manages to reach them from above. That energy arrives in a particular way. It falls, slowly, continuously, in tiny fragments. Dead organisms from the surface drift downward when they die. Shed scales, discarded shells, fecal pellets from animals feeding near the surface. All of it drifts down through the water column in a slow, constant rain. Scientists call this marine snow, and the name is apt. It falls the way snow falls, gently, diffusely, in particles small enough to drift for hours or days before settling. And as it falls, it carries energy, carbon, nutrients, the chemical record of life that happened far above. For the creatures of the deep, this falling material is a primary source of sustenance. Not the only one, predation matters and scavenging matters. But the slow rain from above is the foundation of much of what happens in the dark. That is why the deep ocean is so often described as an economy. Energy enters at the top and filters downward, losing a little at each level until what reaches the very bottom is a small fraction of what the sunlit surface produced. Every creature in the deep is working with diminished resources. Every meal represents something that was caught or found or waited for in a system where nothing is abundant and nothing is wasted. The anglerfish sits inside this economy as a predator. That means it does not feed on the marine snow directly. It feeds on the animals that feed on the animals that feed on what the snow provides. It is several steps removed from the surface energy. And that position, deep in the food web, far from the original source, is part of why everything about the anglerfish is tuned for conservation. The energy available at its level is small enough that spending it carelessly is not an option. The stillness, the patience, the weight, all of it makes sense in this context. The anglerfish is not lazy, it is economically precise. Below the zone where sunlight reaches, but above the absolute depths where pressure is most extreme, there lives a community of organisms that has adapted to the twilight and the dark in its own ways. Many of them are small: lanternfishes, hatchetfishes, bristlemouths, small, abundant, often bioluminescent, and remarkable for something the anglerfish does not do. They migrate. Each day, vast numbers of these small fishes rise toward the surface at night to feed in the relatively richer waters above, then descend again before dawn to avoid the predators that hunt in the light. This daily vertical migration is one of the largest animal movements on the planet, measured by the sheer biomass involved, and it happens invisibly in water no one sees. These migrating animals are part of the anglerfish's world. Not because the anglerfish follows them, it does not generally, but because their movement carries energy downward in a different form. When a lanternfish eats near the surface and then descends, it brings that surface energy with it in its body. When it dies or is eaten, that energy transfers. The system is more connected than it appears. The surface and the deep are not separate economies so much as one economy with a long, slow circulatory system. The anglerfish, waiting in the dark, is one of the terminals of that circulation. What arrives in front of its lure may be something that fed near the surface hours ago, or something that fed on something that did. The chain is long, the links are invisible, but the energy moves, and eventually some of it reaches the place where a small light is glowing in still water. Among the anglerfish's neighbors in the deep are other light-making creatures. Bioluminescence is not rare in the deep ocean. It is, by some estimates, the most common form of light production on Earth, if measured by the number of species that use it. Jellyfish glow, squid flash. Small shrimp produce clouds of luminescent fluid when threatened. Certain fish carry rows of light organs along their bellies. The deep sea is not, in truth, entirely dark. It is dark in the way that a moonless sky is dark. Not absolutely lightless, but lit only by the small and scattered sources that life itself has made. The anglerfish's lure is one point of light among many. What makes it different is its purpose. Most bioluminescence in the deep serves defensive ends, confusing predators, signaling to potential mates, or producing light that disrupts the silhouette of an animal seen from below. The anglerfish's lure is offensive. It is bait. It is designed not to warn or confuse, but to attract, and attraction in a place where light is rare is a powerful thing. A small animal in the deep that sees an unexplained glow has very little reference for what it might mean. It may mean food, it may mean a mate, it may mean nothing at all. The anglerfish's lure exploits that uncertainty. It offers a light and it waits for curiosity to do the rest. There is something in this arrangement that says something quiet about the deep ocean's ecosystem more broadly. In a world with so few signals, each signal carries more weight. At the surface, light is everywhere, and a single additional point of it means very little. In the deep, Where almost nothing glows, a single light is an event. The anglerfish has found a way to become an event in an environment that rarely produces them. That is not a small thing. Other predators in the deep use different strategies. Some are active hunters, using speed and lateral line sensitivity to track prey through vibration and pressure change. Some are ambush predators like the anglerfish, but without the lure. They rely on camouflage and stillness rather than attraction. Some are scavengers, following chemical gradients toward anything that has recently died. The deep sea supports a variety of predatory approaches, and that variety itself is a form of ecological stability. If every creature used the same strategy, competition would be intense and the system fragile. Because they differ, they partition the available resources, each exploiting a slightly different niche, and the whole system holds together with more resilience than any single approach could sustain. The anglerfish's niche is narrow and specific. It requires a particular range of depth, a particular range of temperature, a particular density of prey animals passing through its territory. Move it too far from those conditions, and the strategy stops working. But within those conditions, it works extremely well. The anglerfish has been refining this approach across tens of millions of years, and the fact that it is still here, still glowing, still waiting, still producing the next generation in the cold dark, is the clearest possible evidence that the approach is sound. What the anglerfish contributes to the system around it is harder to see than what it takes from it, but it is real. By feeding on smaller fish and crustaceans, it regulates their populations. Not dramatically. One anglerfish eating rarely is not a powerful ecological force on its own, but across many individuals and many years, the pressure of predation shapes the behavior and abundance of prey species. Animals that are hunted evolve in response to being hunted. They may become faster or more cautious or better at detecting lures. The anglerfish, in turn, may evolve lures that are more convincing, more varied, more difficult to recognize as lures. This is the quiet arms race of ecology, running so slowly that no individual generation witnesses it, but shaping both sides over time. The anglerfish also participates in the ocean's carbon cycle, though this is perhaps the most abstract of its ecological roles. When it eats, it incorporates carbon into its body. When it dies, that carbon sinks to the sea floor or is consumed by scavengers and incorporated into their bodies in turn. Carbon that entered the ocean at the surface as dissolved gas was fixed by photosynthetic organisms, passed through several bodies, and eventually came to rest in the deep. The anglerfish is one of the waypoints on that long journey. It is a small waypoint, but the deep ocean's role in storing carbon is significant for the planet as a whole. And the creatures living there, including the anglerfish, are part of how that storage works. None of this is visible from the outside. The deep sea keeps its accounting in the dark, and the numbers are recorded in chemistry and anatomy, and the slow accumulation of sediment on the seafloor. The anglerfish does not know it is participating in a planetary carbon cycle. It knows, in whatever way a fish knows things, that there is cold water around it, and a lure in front of it, and perhaps something moving in the distance. The larger picture is invisible to it, as so many larger pictures are invisible to the creatures living within them. But the larger picture is there. The anglerfish is not floating alone in an empty ocean. It is embedded in a system, connected to the surface by falling particles and migrating fish, connected to the sea floor by the eventual weight of everything that dies, connected to other predators by the shared pressure of competition and the shared resource of limited prey. The connections are long and slow and mostly invisible, but they are real. Every creature in the deep is part of this slow, intricate web, and the anglerfish, with its patient light and its economy of movement, is woven into it as precisely as anything else. The deep ocean asks a great deal of the things that live there. The anglerfish gives what it has: a body shaped for stillness, a light shaped for waiting, a life shaped for the long and careful use of whatever the dark provides. In return, the ocean sustains it, not generously, not easily, but enough. And enough in this quiet economy is everything. And once appearance loosens its hold on us, a much older story begins to emerge. The first time most people encounter an anglerfish, the reaction is almost immediate. Something in the face activates an old alarm. The teeth are too many, too curved, too visible. The eyes are pale and seem to look without seeing. The body is soft in the wrong places and rigid in others, assembled, it seems, without concern for elegance. People use the word monstrous. They use frightening. They use grotesque, as though the animal had failed at something, as though there were a standard it was meant to meet and simply didn't. It is worth sitting with that reaction for a moment, not to dismiss it, but to ask where it comes from. Human beings read faces. This is very old, very deep, and almost entirely involuntary. A face with too many teeth signals danger. Eyes that don't move in recognizable ways signals something alien, something outside the category of things that can be understood. The brain does this quickly before thought arrives, and it renders a verdict. Not safe, not familiar, not like us. The anglerfish triggers all of this at once, and so the mind reaches for the word that has always described things that look like danger without being something it can name: monster. But the anglerfish is not a monster. It is a fish. A very old, very precisely shaped fish, living in a place where the conditions that made it are entirely invisible to us. That is the first shift. The face we find disturbing is not a face in the way we mean the word. It is a feeding apparatus. The teeth are angled inward because prey must not escape once caught, and in the deep sea, a missed meal is not a minor inconvenience. It is a serious cost. The jaw is wide because the next meal may be larger than expected, and a body that can accommodate the unexpected survives longer than one that cannot. What reads as aggression is engineering. What reads as excess is precision. There is a concept, quiet and worth turning over slowly, that might be described as ecological beauty. Not beauty in the way we usually mean it. Not symmetry, not color, not the kind of form that catches light in a pleasing way. Ecological beauty is the beauty of fit. The beauty of a shape that corresponds exactly to the pressures that made it. A key that opens a specific lock. A word that means exactly one thing. The anglerfish, by this measure, is beautiful. Every feature that disturbs us is a feature that works. The pale eyes are sensitive to bioluminescence, to the faint signals other creatures make in the dark. The soft body reduces density and makes hovering effortless in cold water. The expandable stomach is not grotesque. It is generous in a strange way, a body that built in extra capacity against the long odds of the deep. And the lure, the small glowing point that we have spent so much time with in this video, is perhaps the most elegant thing about it. A light grown from the body itself, patient, steady, requiring nothing but the chemistry that sustains it. When we call the anglerfish monstrous, we are measuring it against the wrong thing. We are comparing it to creatures that live in light, that move through warm and abundant water, that have evolved under entirely different pressures. We are comparing it to ourselves, really, to our own sense of what a face should look like, what a body should do, what beauty is supposed to be. There is something worth noticing about the history of human reactions to unfamiliar animals. Bats were once considered sinister because they moved at night and in ways that seemed wrong for a creature that was not a bird. Octopuses were imagined as sea monsters for centuries before anyone looked at them carefully enough to see that their intelligence was simply organized differently. Deep-sea creatures of all kinds have been described in the language of nightmare since the first ones were hauled to the surface and examined by people who had no frame for what they were seeing. And then, slowly, the frame changes. The bat becomes a marvel of echolocation. The octopus becomes a question about the nature of mind. The deep-sea fish becomes evidence of life's extraordinary patience with darkness. The anglerfish is somewhere in that process, still often described as frightening in popular media, still used as shorthand for something alien and threatening. And yet, for anyone who has spent time with it, with its biology, its stillness, its economy, its strange and delicate place in the ocean's slow accounting, something else begins to settle in, something closer to tenderness. That word might seem odd. Tenderness toward an anglerfish. It is not a creature that invites it in the usual way. It does not have the soft eyes of a seal or the playfulness of a dolphin. It does not move in ways that feel expressive. It hangs in the dark and waits, and the waiting is its whole life. But tenderness does not require familiarity. It can arise from understanding, from recognizing that something exists in difficult conditions and has found, over a very long time, a way to persist. There is something in that persistence that is hard to look at without feeling something quiet and warm. Not pity. The anglerfish does not need pity. It is not suffering. It is simply living in the way it has always lived. But recognition, maybe. An acknowledgement that this creature has solved problems we cannot imagine facing, using tools we would never have thought to develop in a place we cannot visit. That recognition is a kind of empathy. And empathy does not require similarity. What changes when we stop measuring life by surface familiarity is not the animal. The anglerfish does not become different. What changes is the question we are asking. We stop asking, does this look like something I would call beautiful? And we start asking, what kind of beauty does this actually have? Those are very different questions. The first one places the anglerfish in a hierarchy, measures it against a standard it was never meant to meet, and finds it wanting. The second one goes toward the anglerfish on its own terms. It asks what it means to have a light that grows from your body. It asks what it means to be shaped so precisely for cold and pressure and dark that every excess has been removed and only what works remains. It asks what it means to be so well fitted to a place that the place itself is, in a sense, inside you, written into your bones and your blood and the chemistry of your glow. That is a different kind of beautiful. It is quieter. It does not announce itself. it requires patience to see. There is a word in some traditions of aesthetic thought for beauty that is not immediately pleasing. Beauty that takes time, that requires a willingness to sit with discomfort before something opens. The anglerfish is that kind of beautiful. It does not offer itself easily. It hides in the dark, and if you want to see it, you have to go toward it, which means going toward the dark too. Most of the things worth understanding are like this. The deep sea has always been a place that asks something of the human imagination. It asks us to extend our sense of what is possible, what is livable, what is real. The anglerfish asks us to extend something further still, our sense of what deserves to be seen with care. What deserves, in its quiet and unhurried way, to be admired, not because it is majestic in the way we expect majesty, not because it is dramatic or fast or colourful or warm, but because it has done something remarkable. It has found a way to live in one of the most demanding places on earth, and it has done so with a kind of completeness that is, when you sit with it long enough, genuinely moving. The anglerfish does not know it is being considered. It does not know that somewhere on the surface, a mind is turning it over slowly in the dark, looking for the word that fits. It only knows the cold water and the faint pull of the current, and the quiet light it carries with it always, small and steady and entirely its own. That light is enough to see by if you are patient. And patience in the deep is everything. The ocean has been dark for a very long time. Not the darkness of a room with the lights off, where the shapes of familiar things still hold their outlines in memory. A different kind. The darkness of a place where light has simply never arrived, where it was never expected, never needed, never part of the conditions that life would have to negotiate. That darkness is ancient, and the creatures shaped by it are ancient in a way that is difficult to hold in the mind all at once. The anglerfish lineage does not begin in the deep. That is the first thing to understand, and it is the detail that gives everything else its strange weight. The ancestors of modern anglerfish were fish of shallower waters, ordinary in the way that ancient fish are ordinary, which is to say they were already remarkable, already millions of years in the making, but not yet this. Not yet the lure, the fused body, the expandable jaw, the drift through lightless cold. Those came later. They came from pressure in every sense of the word. What the fossil record suggests, and what the genetic relationships between species quietly confirm, is a gradual movement downward. Not a single dramatic crossing into the abyss, but a slow descent across evolutionary time. Populations finding themselves at greater depths, generation by generation, and either failing there or finding something that worked. Most failed. The deep sea is not forgiving of half measures. The ones that stayed were the ones that had something useful, a slightly larger mouth, a stomach that could expand, a spine that had shifted position, or a light-producing organ that happened to attract more than it repelled. These were not inventions. They were accidents that turned out to matter. That is how it always works. And yet knowing that does not make it less astonishing. The order Lophiiformes, the broader group that contains what we call anglerfish, is thought to have diverged from related fish somewhere, around 100 million years ago, perhaps earlier. The estimates shift as new specimens are found, as genetics are refined, as the picture of ancient ocean life becomes slightly less incomplete. But the number is large enough that it becomes geological rather than historical. 100 million years ago, there were no humans. There were no great apes. The continents were arranged differently. The oceans themselves were warmer, shallower in places, deeper in others, and the creatures moving through them were solving problems that no longer exist, or solving the same problems in worlds we would barely recognize. The anglerfish was there. Not this anglerfish exactly, not the species we know, but the lineage was present, branching, testing, losing most of its experiments and keeping a few. The deep sea forms we now call ceratioids, the ones with the lures, the parasitic males, the extraordinary specializations. Those emerged more recently within that broader lineage, as the deep ocean itself changed and stabilized into something closer to what it is now. But 100 million years is not the beginning. It is only a branch point. The roots go deeper still. What the deep ocean offers to a lineage willing to enter it is a very particular kind of stability. The surface world is turbulent in geological terms. Ice ages arrive and retreat. Sea levels rise and fall. Coastlines shift. Shallow habitats that were rich with life become dry land, or cold desert, or something else entirely. The creatures of the surface world have had to be adaptable in a certain way, responsive to change, capable of moving with it. The deep sea changes too, but more slowly. The cold is persistent. The pressure is consistent. The darkness is total and has been total for as long as there has been a deep ocean to speak of. A creature shaped for those conditions is, in a sense, shaped for something durable. The deep does not rearrange itself on the timescales that rearrange so much else. This may be part of why the anglerfish's specialized form is so complete. There has been time. Enormous, patient, geologically slow time to test each variation, to lose each mistake, to keep each small improvement. The lure is not a rough draft. It is the result of iteration across a span of time that makes the whole of recorded human history seem like a single breath. That is worth sitting with. The selective pressures that shaped the anglerfish were not complicated in principle. They were simply relentless. Find food where food is rare. Find a mate where distance makes meetings improbable. Survive pressure that would crush most life. Manage energy in a place where energy is always scarce. These are not unusual problems. Life has faced versions of them everywhere. But the Hobot deep sea intensifies each one. There is no relief from the cold. There is no occasional shaft of light. There is no season when prey becomes more abundant. The conditions do not ease, and so the solutions that survived are equally unrelenting. The lure does not rest. The jaw does not stay small. The male does not remain separate if fusion works better. Each trait we find remarkable is just a solution that the deep sea kept because every alternative was worse. When you look at the anglerfish this way, not as a strange exception, but as an accumulation of kept solutions, it begins to feel less like a creature and more like an argument. A very old, very patient argument that the deep sea has been making to life for millions of years. The argument is simply, here are the conditions. What have you got? The anglerfish is one answer, one of many, but a particularly complete one. There is something settling about deep time when you let it be. It can feel vertiginous at first, all those zeros, all that emptiness before the present moment. But there is another way to receive it. The anglerfish has been shaped across an interval so vast that it contains everything we know of civilization many times over, and it is still here, still drifting, still carrying its light. The darkness that made it is the same darkness it lives in now. Nothing about that has changed. Most lineages that have ever existed are gone. The extinction rate across the history of life is staggering, and the creatures that remain are not the lucky ones, so much as the ones that happen to fit, in their particular way, the particular world they were given. The anglerfish fit the deep. It fitted so well that the fitting became permanent, written into the body, into the chemistry, into the strange and elegant architecture of a fish that looks like nothing else. That is not luck exactly. It is something harder to name. A kind of correspondence between a creature and its place that took an enormous amount of time to arrive at, and that holds now with a quiet authority. The deep ocean continues to change, even now, slowly. The water warms in ways it has not warmed before, at least not on the timescales that matter to life. What that means for the creatures shaped by cold and pressure and the long stability of the dark is not yet fully known. These are not questions to carry into sleep. They are questions for daylight, for science, for the people whose work it is to watch the ocean carefully. What belongs here, in the dark and the quiet, is the older story, the one that happened before we were here to notice it. The anglerfish descending, generation by generation, into deeper water. The lure appearing, the jaw expanding, the male finding his strange resolution to the problem of distance. All of it unobserved, unhurried, unfolding across intervals that have no human scale. The ocean was testing life long before life had eyes to see with. And the anglerfish, in its patient and particular way, passed. Across that long span of time, another relationship quietly formed as well, the one between this hidden fish and us. Though hidden is almost too small a word for it. For most of the time that humans have existed, the anglerfish was simply absent from our awareness. It lived below the reach of nets, below the depth of any light we could send down, below the edge of what we imagined the ocean to contain. It was there, drifting as it had always drifted, in the cold and the dark and the immense quiet of a place that had been ancient long before we arrived, and that will remain long after. The anglerfish does not know about geological time. It does not carry the weight of its own history. It only carries its light, small and steady, forward through the water. That is enough. That has always been enough. And now we stop knowing and simply become. There is a particular kind of image that stays with a person, not because it is pleasant or because it is beautiful in any conventional sense, but because it refuses to settle. It stays at the edge of the mind and does not explain itself. The anglerfish is that kind of image for many people. They encounter it once, in a film, in a museum case, in a photograph taken by a remotely operated vehicle in the dark of a trench, and it does not leave. Something about it catches, something about it holds. It is worth sitting with that for a moment, not rushing past it toward another fact. Most of the animals that live in human imagination are animals that humans have seen. The horse, the wolf, the whale glimpsed from a boat. Even mythological creatures tend to be built from familiar parts. Wings from birds, scales from fish, the general outline of things already known. The anglerfish is different. It arrived in the human mind, almost complete, almost fully formed, from a world that no one had seen. It came up in nets, or it appeared on screens lowered into places no human could follow. It was never observed in the ordinary way, moving through a landscape that a person could also move through. It was always, from the beginning, a visitor from somewhere unreachable. That unreachability is part of why it holds. The first descriptions of deep-sea anglerfish, when they began arriving in scientific literature in the 19th century, were met with something between disbelief and fascination. The creatures looked wrong. The proportions were wrong. The teeth were too large, the head too wide, the body too soft, the lure too strange to be accounted for easily by what naturalists already understood. There was no familiar framework into which the anglerfish fit without some effort. And so, the effort was made, slowly, across decades of specimen work and careful drawing and taxonomic revision to understand what exactly had been found. What had been found, it turned out, was a creature shaped by a different world entirely. A world that operated by different rules, rewarded different strategies, and had been doing so for longer than the familiar world of light and air. The scientists who worked on these specimens were working with dead animals, usually. Preserved, compressed slightly by the journey upward, the colors faded, the lure gone slack. The living anglerfish was not something that could be easily watched. For a long time, it was not watched at all. The deep ocean remained, for most of human history, genuinely unknown. Not unknown the way a distant mountain range is unknown, visible from a distance, reachable in principle, eventually explored. Unknown the way something is unknown when it exists entirely beyond the reach of any tool you possess. The pressure at depth destroys what is not built for it. The darkness resists ordinary light. The cold slows everything, including the movement of human curiosity into places where it cannot easily survive. That changed gradually across the 20th century. Submersibles descended. Cameras were lowered on cables. Remotely operated vehicles crept along the sea floor with their lights and their arms and their recording equipment, moving through a world that had never been lit before. And the anglerfish, among many other creatures, began to be seen. There is something almost strange about that word in this context. Seen. To be seen for the first time by its species that had never been able to reach you. To have your darkness interrupted by a human light, just briefly, just long enough for a camera to record. The anglerfish in those moments was not aware of being discovered. It was simply there, as it had always been. But something happened in those moments that the anglerfish itself could not participate in. A recognition, a transmission across an enormous distance, from the Eidid's lightless deep to the lit screens of people who had never expected to see such a thing. The footage that exists of living deep-sea anglerfish is genuinely rare. There are not many hours of it. What there is tends to be brief, slightly blurred, lit by the artificial lights of the vehicle rather than anything the fish itself produces. The lure glows. The fish drifts, or holds still, or turns slowly away from the camera. In some footage, the enormous mouth is visible. In others, only the silhouette and the light. People watch this footage and feel something that is difficult to name. It is not quite fear, though fear is part of it for some. It is not quite joy, though there is something that resembles joy in the recognition that such a thing exists. It is something closer to the feeling of standing at the edge of something vast and understanding, for a moment, how large the world actually is. That is a feeling the anglerfish seems to produce reliably, not by doing anything, simply by being what it is in the place where it lives. In museums, the anglerfish appears behind glass, in tanks or in cases, usually preserved. The colors are muted. The lure hangs still. Children stop in front of these cases and stare, and the staring has a quality of genuine reckoning, of trying to understand how something could look like this and still be real. Adults stop too, and the staring is similar, only quieter. The anglerfish makes people slow down. It interrupts the ordinary pace of moving through a museum and demands a moment of attention that feels different from the attention given to more familiar animals. What is that attention? It is not the attention given to something threatening. It is not the attention given to something beautiful in a simple way. It is the attention given to something that does not fit the expected categories, something that arrived from outside the ordinary and has not fully entered it even now, even in a lit museum case on dry land far from the deep. Film found the anglerfish early and found it useful. The image of a small light in absolute darkness, attached to something enormous and patient and waiting, is an image that works on a very deep level. It speaks to something old in the human mind, the ambivalence about lights in dark places, the question of whether a light means safety or danger, the understanding that beautiful things can be deceptive. The anglerfish in film is almost always a monster. It is almost always the darkness made visible, the danger given a face. And yet, the real anglerfish is not a monster. It is a fish. A very old and very particular fish, shaped by pressures that have nothing to do with human fear and everything to do with the simple problem of surviving in a place where food is rare and mates are rarer. Its light is not a trap in any meaningful, emotional sense. It is a solution, a quiet, patient, elegant solution to a problem that the deep ocean poses to everything that tries to live there. The gap between the anglerfish of human imagination and the anglerfish of the deep sea is a wide one. What is interesting is that both versions hold something true. The imagined one captures something real about how darkness and deception can coexist. The actual one captures something real about how life adapts to conditions that seem, from the outside, impossibly hard. Neither version cancels the other. What it means to be fascinated by an animal you cannot reach is something that does not resolve easily. The anglerfish lives beyond ordinary human sight. It will always live there. The footage, the specimens, the careful scientific illustrations, all of these are translations, approximations, attempts to carry something across a distance that remains finally uncrossable. The anglerfish itself is elsewhere. It is in the cold and the dark and the immense quiet of a place that does not require our attention to continue being what it is. And yet, the fascination persists. It persists across people who have no particular interest in biology, across children who have barely begun to understand what an ocean is, across scientists who have spent careers studying the deep sea and still find the anglerfish remarkable. There is something in this animal that catches the mind and does not let go. And that something is not fully explained by the lure or the teeth or the strange biology of the fused male. It may be the distance itself. The knowledge that this life is happening right now, in the dark, in the cold, in the pressure, entirely without reference to anything we are or do or care about. The anglerfish does not need to be found to continue existing. It does not need to be understood to continue drifting and waiting and carrying its small light forward through water that has been dark for a very long time. That is, perhaps, what stays. Not the image exactly, but the sense of a world proceeding quietly in the dark, unreachable and unhurried, complete in itself, needing nothing from us at all. The light continues, somewhere far below, small, patient, drifting in the cold. Everything we have learned fades for a moment into the simplest thing of all, a single day. The water is cold here, not cold the way a surface swimmer knows cold. The shock of it, the gasp. This is a different kind. It is the cold of something that has never been warm, that has no memory of warmth, that does not know warmth as an absence. It is simply the temperature of this place, your place. You have always been inside it, and it has always been inside you, and there is no separation between the pressure of the water and the shape of your body, because one has made the other, slowly, over a long time. You do not begin the day so much as continue it. There is no dawn here, no color change at the edge of the sky, no gradual brightening that tells a body to wake. There is only the dark, which was here when you last rested, and is here now, unchanged, patient as stone. What shifts is something interior, a slow return of attention, an awareness of the water moving against you in ways too faint for almost anything else to read. You drift. It is not sleep ending and waking beginning. It is more like a tide, a quiet coming in of presence, of readiness, arriving so gradually that you cannot say when it happened. You are here. That is enough. The water holds you at this depth without effort on your part, your body neither rising nor sinking, suspended in the column of the sea, the way a thought sometimes suspends itself between sleeping and waking, perfectly balanced, requiring nothing. Before you, your light. It extends from you on its thin stalk, bending slightly, the way something flexible bends in a current you cannot feel directly, but that the lure knows before you do. The glow is faint. You do not see it the way something outside you might see it. A tiny cold point of blue-green light in absolute black water. You are the source of it. It is part of you, the way a hand is part of you, the way breath is part of you. It moves when you intend it to move, and sometimes it moves without intention, trembling in the current, and both kinds of movement are yours. The light does its work without your attention. That is what it is for. To draw something toward you while you wait. To do the hunting while the hunter rests. You have only to hold still and the lure moves. And the dark water between you and the middle distance becomes a kind of invitation. Quiet, patient, glowing very softly, saying nothing in particular to nothing in particular, and waiting to see what answers. You wait. Time passes here in a way that does not map onto the word time very well. There is no sequence of events to mark it by. There is only the water and the light and the faint information arriving through the long line of sensing cells along your side. The lateral line, that thin thread of perception that reads the water for what the water carries. A pressure change, a displacement, something moving at a distance you cannot yet name. You do not respond to it. Not yet. The information arrives and is held. You are very good at this. Your whole body is built for it. The soft bones, the loose and unhurried musculature, the stomach that asks nothing of you until it is needed. You are not tense. Tension costs something, and you do not spend what you do not have to spend. The deep sea has made you careful with energy in a way that goes all the way down to the cellular level, and you carry that economy the way you carry everything else, without effort, without awareness, simply as the shape of what you are. Something comes. It is not dramatic the way a story might make it. It is a presence at the edge of your light, drawn by the glow, held there by uncertainty. A small thing, a pale thing, something that has been moving upward through the water column and has arrived in your layer of the sea and found a light where there should be no light and has not yet decided what to do about that. You do not decide either. Your body decides. That is what the recurved teeth are for, the hinged jaw, the stomach that can expand beyond what seems possible from the outside. When the moment comes, it comes entirely, and then it is over, and the dark water is still again, and you are still again, and something that was outside you is now inside you, and the exchange has happened so quickly that the water has barely registered it. The lure drifts forward again, slowly, settling back into its position. The glow continues, unchanged. The water is still. You are still. The meal is small, relative to what you can hold, and you do not need another one soon. The economy of this life is very clear on that point. What you have received will sustain you for a long time. That is the arrangement. Rare, sufficient, unhurried. The hours pass, or what would be hours measured somewhere else. You drift slightly, not purposefully, not toward anything. The current here is gentle, and you allow it, your body making the small adjustments that keep you in the column, that maintain the depth without any conscious calculation. Your soft body and the water are in a kind of agreement. You move because the water moves, and the water moves because of forces very far from here. And you are one small node in a system so large that the word system barely contains it. Other things drift past, far enough away that they are only information, not opportunity. Something luminous at a distance. Another animal carrying its own light, moving through the dark on its own errand, whatever that is. The lights of the deep are not rare, exactly. There are more of them than the darkness suggests. But they are spaced widely, and they do not intersect unless there is a reason for intersection. You watch the distant light without moving toward it. It asks nothing of you. You ask nothing of it. It passes. There is, somewhere nearby, or perhaps not nearby, in the way the word usually means, but within the range of what your body can sense, something that is not prey and not threat. A presence, small, much smaller than you, moving in a way that is not the movement of the water or the movement of a fish trying to survive. Something that has in its own way arrived. You do not think about this. Thinking is not quite the right word for what happens in a body like yours, in a place like this. But something is registered. Something is noted by whatever in you does the noting. And the water between you and that presence carries a kind of information that is not pressure and not light, and not the vibration of movement. It is something older than any of those things. You do not reach toward it. You do not need to. The arrangement, when it comes, will come in its own way, in its own time, and the deep ocean has always been patient about these things, Life here does not hurry. It cannot afford to. And so the presence remains, somewhere in the water, and you remain where you are, and the dark holds you both without preference, without judgment, without any particular interest in the outcome. The light drifts. You let it. Something in the long hours has begun to shift. Not outside, never outside, where nothing changes, but within you. The readiness that came in slowly with the tide of attention has begun, just as slowly, to recede. You have eaten. You have drifted. You have held your light in the dark for a long time, and the dark has returned whatever it was going to return today, and now there is a settling. Your lure slows. The trembling in it, the small purposeful life of it, gentles down. It still glows. It will always glow, or nearly always, because the light does not require your wakefulness to continue. The bacteria do their work whether you attend to them or not. The light is older than your attention. It will outlast your attention. And so it continues, very faint, very steady, as the rest of you begins to do what you do when the long waiting is finished for this particular passage of dark time. You are still. The water moves around you, and you move with it. But the distinction between your movement and the water's movement has become very small. You are suspended, held. The pressure that would crush almost anything that came here unprepared is simply the pressure of your world, the familiar weight of it, something you have never known the absence of and do not need to imagine the absence of. The cold is the cold. The dark is the dark. Your light is a small glow in a very large space, and the space does not notice it particularly, and you do not need it to. Somewhere above you, very far, the ocean has a surface. Somewhere above that, there is a sky, and in that sky, there are stars, and some of those stars are very old, and the light from them has been traveling for a long time to reach a place where it will be noticed. You do not know about any of this. You do not need to. The water is here. The dark is here. Your light is here. You are still. You are still. You drift very slowly in the black water, and the light before you holds its small steady glow, and nothing moves, and nothing needs to. And the deep ocean continues as it has always continued, quiet and cold and vast and patient, holding everything that belongs to it with the same gentle, indifferent care. The light, still. The water, still. You. And in that stillness, even the strangest life begins to feel familiar. You have traveled a long way tonight, not in distance, but in depth. Down through the lit surface water, through the dimming middle distances, through the last of any borrowed light, all the way to where the cold becomes absolute, and the dark becomes the only condition there is. You have spent time with a creature that lives its entire life in that darkness, and somewhere in the long hours of it, the creature stopped being strange. That is what patient attention does. It dissolves the distance. What remains is something quieter and more lasting than wonder. The anglerfish carries a light grown from its own body, shaped by a partnership so old it has become inseparable from the animal itself. It drifts in water that would extinguish almost any other kind of life. It waits with a patience that is not resignation, but design. A precision arrived at over millions of years of the ocean asking a question and life. Slowly, finding the answer. The deep sea is not empty. That is perhaps the simplest thing this creature offers us. It is not a void. It is a place full of patient forms, each one fitted to its conditions the way a word is fitted to its meaning, not by accident and not by force, but by long and quiet correspondence. Let that settle now. Feel the weight of your body where it rests, not the lightness of almost sleep, but the actual weight. Arms, hands, the length of your legs, the soft heaviness of your face. Let your jaw go. Let your hands open if they have been holding anything. There is nothing to hold. There is nowhere to be. The night outside is doing what nights do, and the ocean is doing what it has always done, and somewhere very far beneath the surface. In the cold dark, a small light is still glowing. It does not need to be seen to keep glowing. That is the nature of it. The bacteria continue their slow luminescent work whether anything notices or not. The light is not a performance. It is simply what that body does in the dark, in the cold, in the patient waiting of a life shaped entirely by where it is. You can rest like that too, quietly, without needing to be seen or attended to. Simply present in the dark, breathing, still. Your breath is slow now. Your body is heavy in the way that bodies become when they have let go of the last small effort of holding themselves ready. There is nothing required of you. The deep water holds everything that belongs to it, and you are held too, in your own way, by the ordinary darkness of a room, by the weight of blankets or air, by the uncomplicated fact of being still. The anglerfish drifts. The light glows. The water moves around it in its ancient way, cold and dark and vast and indifferent, and somehow in that indifference, kind. You are still. The light is still. Sleep well, and good night.